Jen Love, how are you?
I am very well, thank you. And welcome everyone to the very first Fundraisers Book Club. Isn't this exciting?
It's very exciting. It's enabled me to go back and read some books that I've not read for a while, to read some new ones, and I'm looking forward over the next weeks and months of chatting to people and learning new things about them. So yes.
I guess we started this Fundraisers Book Club for a couple of fun ideas, mostly because we wanted to inspire and encourage other fundraisers to read alongside us and with each other. Some old titles, some of the titans and the classics of our sector, and also some newer titles is kind of our goal. We'll be asking throughout our book club for people to vote on what they want to read next. Today, what we're going to do, because it's our first meeting of the book club, today we're going to do, I'm going to interview Mark about this, one of the first book we've selected for the club. And then for the next one, we'll want everybody to be reading along with us. So the first book we've selected for the Fundraisers Book Club is Donor Care by the great, late, wonderful John Hayden. This book has come out very recently, and we lost John too soon. And when this book was really his swan song, he wanted to get all of his thinking and his genius into a place that others could benefit from down the road, and make sure that he captured all the things he'd been thinking about and working on for decades. John and I knew each other through the nonprofit storytelling community. John was involved with that group, as I have been, and I was always impressed and delighted to hear from John. He was a real sparkler. So I am going to ask Mark a handful of questions about this wonderful book, and so let's dive in. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so the book is called Donor Care, How to Keep Donors Coming Back After the First Gift. And care is actually the whole backbone of the book. Connect, appreciate, reply, encourage. So Mark, can you unpack for us what the care framework is, how it works?
I can indeed. That's going to need a long answer.
Good.
But yeah, the key things are that the books. One of the things I like about the book is there are almost like two types of book that you can have. There's the how to do it, tick boxes, you do X, and then you've got those others which are much more about the philosophy behind it. The why we do and how we do. And this one is a combination of the two, but it's almost like a philosophy of fundraising. It's an approach to living. And John talks about in here, obviously the storytelling stuff, but he talks about his Buddhism. He gives you advice on, things like go outside, drink more water, eat the rainbow. There are all those elements. So it's about self-care as much as it is about caring for donors. But care is quite simple. It's a simple acronym. There are 4 points that he goes through in the book, and there's 4 chunks, and it's really easy to read. Some books are you struggle, but this you can sit down and you can go through it. I've reread it over the last couple of days, but care, connect. You connect with obviously donors. Second, you appreciate. Third, you reply, you ask again, and finally, you encourage people to give again. So they are the 3 key elements. And John's got different stories to illustrate all of those elements. But the key point that I think, coming back to the issue you raised, because this was John's last book, and anyone who's read, I think, Facebook Fundraising for Dummies will have a John Hayden book in their house, and most of us have one of those somewhere. There was less fear there. Obviously it was like, I'm going to tell you how it is. I'm going to tell you how people screw up, and I'm going to tell you the problems it creates, and I'm also going to give you direction on how you can do better. And I think that's the key thing that we have to thank John for. He didn't hold back. And the opening point is the key one for me, that he sees the number one problem is a lack, and he says it's an unintentional lack, but a lack of donor care. And what that has is two problems. One, poor retention. And, he's got loads of stats about the number of people who never give again. But also, and this is what we find in our research, lower expectations from donors. I don't expect to have a relationship. I just give them money.
I give because it matters to me, not because of any of the way in which I feel appreciated or valued or connected to the impact of my donation. I give because of me, not because of how I feel or how I'm treated.
Yeah, and that's the point that runs through that. And some of those standard metrics that keeping a donor is, it's 10 times more effective than going out and recruiting a new one.
Right.
Yeah, but focusing and within this there are like so many bullet points. 10 things that you've got to do to welcome a donor. 10 ways you can lose a donor. And it's packed full of those. It's one of those things that you flick through. And as I was rereading it, I was sending emails to, my team saying, we've got to do this. We've got to do that. I've been fundraising 30 odd years. Yeah. And it's full of points like that. So, you buy this book within 20 minutes, you'll have covered the cost. It's a very, very, very good book.
So I'm interested in two things you said there, and we can unpack a couple of other things as we go on. But one of the things you talked about was about how it's fearless, that John wrote this from a place of with nothing to hold back, no reason to be cautious or careful or keep any sacred cows. Wouldn't it be amazing if more fundraisers behaved and wrote and existed like that, just in general? Yeah. There's so much caution, there's so much fear, there's so much fear of judgment, fear of emotion, and it especially right now in the middle of this pandemic, we still are confronting charities who are saying, I don't think it's the right time to ask, we're not on the front line, and if we could just rattle that fear cage and help people see that they're doing that from a place of self-preservation, not from a place of what's actually helpful or useful to the world right now, right?
Absolutely. We're on our third stage of the giving in the time of coronavirus research. Mm-hmm. And if you ask me what the number one problem that charities have is donors don't think they need that charity needs the money because they've not been asked.
Right.
That's the fundamental, and that's going to be a big problem coming around the other side, because organizations have gone out there, they have built new relationships. And, if they're doing well, they've engaged those supporters. And it's not that people are going to stop giving. It's going to be that they might switch their giving. Right. And so, that's the key point. When you make stuff up, when it's not based on evidence, it can come back and bite you. Yeah. And that's the great thing, about this book. It is based on experience. Yeah. It's full of case studies and conversations that he's had with various different people at different organizations, all about, pretty much all about thanking. He uses the same model that you do. He may even have got it from you, but the ask, the thank, the report back model. He's added to it.
Yeah.
But it's that very, very, very simple approach, and it's just packed full of simple tips. And there's a lot of why don't we do more of this?
And I think that ask, thank, report, repeat cycle, I heard of it first from Stephen Stream from the Better Fundraising Company. So I think that's probably where that alignment happened. But that's definitely part of our manifesto as well.
There's loads of credits in the book. Loads of credits.
The other thing that is interesting that I liked about what you said there too, and just in the little introductory part here, is that it's readable. I think over the course of this fundraising book club, we're going to push people in some directions to be reading some books that are quite dense or academic, or the author comes from a different place, or the author has different intentions. But this is one of the ones that I agree is just, it's wonderfully, I mean, knowing John, it's chatty and conversational and full of stories. Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you another question. What, of all the fundraising books that you've read and skimmed, what did you learn uniquely from this one? What was something in this one that stood out?
Yeah, that's a toughie. I think one of the things that it drove home for me is, it probably relates to storytelling. From this, because obviously, one of the things that John is talking about, is you're not just telling a story. Fundraising is not about telling stories. It's about giving a story to tell. And he's got some great ways of illustrating the power of that. And there was one in there. Have you ever heard his story about the eBay, buying the stuff from eBay?
Yes.
Yeah. And that one I loved, that they spent, I can't remember who it is, but he recounts the story. They spent $250 on buying stuff from eBay, and then whoever did this sold them, but with stories attached. And he talks about the little tray with the duck head on it.
Suddenly worth weight, yeah.
Yeah, and he spoke about, he said that when that was on eBay, it was his. Or the person who did it, they described it as their father's every day. He'd come in, pop the keys and the wallet on there, and it sold for like $75. And that's the key point. When we're writing our appeals, when we're asking for money, we've got to remember that it's, and this is another point that John makes, that it's really hard to connect to an inanimate object when there is no value. A value is something that we ascribe, or it's something that we can give. And that's what we as fundraisers are doing. That when we tell that story, that's when we are going to be successful. I remember writing a letter once for ActionAid years ago, and the opening line was about a little boy who learned how to mimic parrots. And he could get them to come out of the tree. He was that good. But that was the opening line. And when John talks about connection, that's what that story does.
Yeah.
It's just a little boy. It's a little boy who can do bird sounds so well that he attracts, and suddenly you've got a person there, rather than somebody who just needs help. Yeah. And that's the key thing. Yeah. And as, when John talks about connection, you connect before you ask, and you connect through. Well, you can do it with animals as well, but you can connect through people, or you can connect through things. If you think about the little duck train, but that was the point.
But it's the unifying connector. There is the story, is the fact that it comes from a story, and one of the things that if there's a knock on, I hear this every once in a while, and it drives me mad, is people saying, aren't we kind of past like post storytelling? We've been doing storytelling at conferences for 1,000 years when we used to have conferences. At what point do we kind of are we post storytelling? Are we storytelling fatigue? Is it, are we over all this? And I think this is not, in fundraising, we're not telling stories for the sake of stories. I'm also a voracious reader of novels and other forms of fiction and books. And those are storytelling for storytelling's sake for me. I read those because I want to know what's happening with my current favorite, Dr. Ruth Galloway, because I'm in love with this character. But storytelling for fundraising is storytelling for action and storytelling to drive gifts. So it's not just that you're telling a wonderful story about a boy who can summon parrots from the tree. You're doing it because you're making a connection with that person, and then you're making them they come alive in a different way, and you feel more connected to them. And so John that has always been his life philosophy, was around storytelling for change, for action, which is not unlike our friend Ken Burnett in his book, Storytelling Can Change the World. Same principles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the stories that go through this book really help illustrate some important points. Have you heard the story about you've probably heard all these because I never went to the storytelling conference, but you've heard the story about Aissa from Niger. Have you heard that?
So. No. Tell.
This sums up the book, and it sums up storytelling.
Okay. Wow. I'm ready.
There's a story there. A woman called Aissa from a very poor community in Niger, and she has a child. I think it's her first child, and the women take the children when they're collecting water. It's the women's job in that village to collect water, and they're quite heavy earthenware pots that they carry. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of her first times going with her daughter tied to her back. And he talks about how she went to the well, and there's rope, and you have to get the bucket and things like that. And she was leaning down, and she slips. And this well is a concrete well, falls down, crack, snaps her collarbone. Oof. On the way down, with a child down the well. That's all he tells you. That's all he tells you in the book. How do you feel?
Oh, gutted.
What happened to Aissa? What happened to the little girl?
The unfinished story.
Yeah, and that's what we do in fundraising. What we do in fundraising is we give you that, and you give your money, but we don't give you that back. And he doesn't tell you. He says, go online, search Aissa falls down the well. It's a charity water story, and you can find out what happens. And that's how powerful. If you're watching this now and you do it, there's your answer to why storytelling still works.
Yeah.
And post storytelling. Yeah.
Well, and I think that the storytelling, it's such a layered conversation around storytelling, because there are ways in which we need to tell stories, and in that example, sometimes an unfinished story is the best kind of fundraising story, because you say, I don't know how this is going to end. I can tell you that this person is in distress, or this animal is in distress, and here's what they need, and here's how we could help them. Yeah. But we can't help them without you.
Yeah.
And that unfinished story, it can be incredibly impactful. So then the other half of that would be that when the donor has taken action, then you come back to them and say, I'm thrilled to tell you that, you made it possible and everybody's safe.
Yeah, and if we, one of the models that we talk about in Blue Frog is we call it the EastEnders model. Do you have EastEnders in Canada?
I thought we might. I don't know what EastEnders is.
It's a soap.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's an ongoing soap. I don't know what the big soaps are in Canada or the US, but it's an ongoing.
So let's just bypass it, because there would be the Canadian soaps would be not worth another second of discussion.
But if you look at the model of any soap, there's always three stories that are ongoing. So one is just starting, one is just building to that climax, and the other one is finishing. And they're always working in unison. And that's why you watch a soap.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I'm really excited about finding what's happening. And then bubbling under is another storyline. And it picks you up and it carries you. And that's what we do in newsletters.
Yes.
Yeah, so, we have appeals, which are the big problem, really. As John says, ask, thank, and report back. Ask is the sad story. Mm-hmm. Thanking is the happy story, and the reporting back is a mixture of the two.
Right.
And it's that same model that you're constantly sharing that information, but you're also answering. You're giving people, here's the jeopardy, and here's how you resolve that. Wow. And they're the key things that comes from is obviously something that is another reason why you should read stories.
Okay, so what about when you when you got through the book and you said that, even getting into it very early, you were already firing emails off to your team about doing this and doing that. What do you think are a couple of big takeaways that you think people can that are relatively easy, not easy, but you know what I mean? Like something that people read this book and then you'll be able to act on this quite quickly.
Yeah,
some quick ones from the book.
Number one that he's got there is he has another story. I'll do this one. Have you heard the Ozzy Osbourne story, Black Sabbath?
Yes, I've heard the Ozzy Osbourne story.
Okay, so Ozzy Osbourne, he gets slung out of Black Sabbath, needs someone else to play guitar, and he ends up auditioning, and there's a guy called Randy Rhoads. Mm-hmm. And when Randy Rhoads turns up to audition, he's not dressed up like a Jimi Hendrix impersonator. He literally is there with his little guitar and a practice amp. And Ozzy says, well, if that's your kit, you're going to be good. I'll have you. And it's that point. Be different. Do different. Stand out is the point. And he talks about giving in the book. Give to five other charities in your sector. And most of his is online. He's talking about giving online. And see what they do. And do different. And he highlights there, he says, rarely will you get, one of my suggestions is always give twice to an organization. Get yourself into this person is more than just a prospect, they're interested.
Right.
And see if you get the same email and see if you get anything different. And that's what John is highlighting. Look what other people do and do different. And, there's a whole series of very, very simple ideas that you can use for online giving. And he's talking very simple things that so many people don't do. Tracking donor conversions with just unique URLs. When people click through to your thank you page, try and give them an action so you can measure engagement. Can we send you this? Will you sign this petition? Is it all of those little actions? And, if you go online and give, $20, £20 to 5 different organizations in your sector, see who treats you best, see what you want to copy, and then how can you make yourself different? Because if someone cares about a cause, they may well be giving to other organizations in that sector.
Right.
They might be looking for, the organization that they engage with for the rest of their life. And what
I love about what John talks about that it's not just about doing different in terms of authenticity, so that you're actually doing different, like Randy Rhoads showed up and was his authentic self, showing up as our true selves is important. But so that authenticity about doing things different, but that are true to you. The other half of that too is around, in marketing, with marketing concept of USP, unique selling proposition, what you do that no one else does. And in the charitable sector, we have that too. At the agents, we call it your URG, your unique reason to give. So if you give to 5 or 6 different environmental organizations, as I do, as many of us do, I can tell you very specifically why I support each one uniquely. And I'm very clear on why I support the organizations that I do, even if they're in the same kind of vein or category. So organizations that can do the work to identify their URG, what they do uniquely, what they do that no one else does as effectively, and make that authentic voice the way that you ask and thank and report and repeat. That you won't get into issues of mission drift where you're a charity that's suddenly doing something different, chasing a shiny new object. There's a lot of strength and power in that. So did you ever meet John, Mark?
No, all our communication was on Twitter. That was, it was a bit like where I met you and John on Twitter. But luckily, I can't remember where we first bumped into each other. Probably one of the Toronto.
I think it was Congress, yeah.
Yeah, with Tony Elisha, but all my conversations were, were around Twitter. I think we spoke once on an actual conversation, but yeah, it was normally, can I borrow this? Will you share that?
There's probably lots of people watching who knew John from, Twitter only. But to the point we were just making, John was the authentic John on Twitter, just the same ways he would be in person. So the John that showed up at his keyboard every day to write stories and connect with his community and support other fundraisers is the same guy. I mean, he was authentic through and through. So, well, I think we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I wanted to ask you one last question about the book, which is, what do you hope, what was there anything that you thought, I wish there was more about this. I wish there was more on, was there anything like if we could be so lucky to have a sequel, what are some of the ideas that are introduced that you'd like to see more about?
The one area was that John talks a lot about monthly giving, direct debits, regular giving, as we include in the UK, and that's what I'd like to have a conversation with him about, because obviously in the UK we have a very mature monthly giving market, and in North America, and in many other countries around the globe, it's like, go out and get your regular gift. Get your regular gift, because they're going to stick with you forever, and they're worth so much more. It's not the case in the UK. It's not the case in the UK, particularly with face-to-face recruitment. Attrition is super high. No pays are high. Like text giving, massive attrition rates, and that's what I'd love to have the conversation with him about. Because he says one great thing in there. He says that you should have different journeys for different donors, and he talks about your one-off donor, that they need to be shown that that they made the right decision. Somebody's given twice, that's the sort of time when you should sign someone up to a regular gift, and that's exactly it. When I started out in fundraising, there was a mantra: 2 gifts in 18 months. That's when you move someone to a regular gift, and you can do it from the get-go. But you don't necessarily have that level of loyalty. But that's the point.
Well,
that's the point I'd have liked to.
I bet you the end to that story would be, it's 2 gifts, whether that takes 2 weeks or 18 months, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's based on the donor schedule, not the charity schedule.
And that's the key. That's the key point. It's what works for the donors. And when we were chatting about coronavirus, and I discussed the anniversary appeal for coronavirus, which you called the
Coronaversary.
That needs to be in your schedule now. In the UK, 23rd of March. What did you help achieve over the last year? And it's an important point. So it's the anniversaries are the anniversaries that work for the donor, not for you. It's not, we always do an Easter appeal. Next year's Easter appeal, unless you're a religious organisation, coronaversary. Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left, and we want to get to the next potential books. Anything else, Mark? Any final comments on your Brody's notes, Cole's notes, anything I didn't ask that you wanted to make sure that we...
No, I think that was good. That will give you a taster. And don't forget, I'm going to hold it up again. You'll probably see it. There we go. Don't care. Buy this book. I can't remember how much it was, but it's a bargain. And you've also got an intro from Tom Ahern as well.
Extra bonus, right? Yeah.
And don't forget, anyone who buys it, go and have a look at page 182. 182. You've got to read page 182. That's the most important.
It's the most important page in the book.
The most important page. The insight on page 182. That's what you need.
Okay, so for our next book, we are going to look to our community of Fundraisers Book Club members, because we have your choice, and we're going to take a vote, okay? So you're going to have to watch the Fundraising Everywhere Twitter. Mark and I will also share widely. So the 2 choices are, you ready, Mark?
I'm ready.
Whoops, wrong side. Relationship Fundraising by the King, Ken Burnett, who we had a lovely conversation with just a few weeks ago at the Individual Giving Summit. So relationship fundraising, definitely on the list. Or another one, another classic, Asking Properly, George Smith.
Another classic.
Another classic. So I have read this book cover to cover. I have read most of this book, skimmed the whole thing, but I haven't read it in full detail. So I will definitely read it cover to cover, both of them again, for the next club, depending on which we choose. Do you have an early favorite, Mark? Is there one of those two that you want to try to push people in a certain direction?
I'm very much the same as you. I've read Asking Properly, and it really is a sort of go-to book for me. Ken's book is a philosophy, and I am a great proponent of relationship fundraising. But like you, I've read most of it, not all, and so I perhaps wouldn't mind, an excuse to actually sit down and go through that properly. But I will do either. I love both. It's not going to be a pain.
So we're going to ask everybody to vote, and we'll be back in a month or so when we're all reading this book together. And then over the course of the next few sections of the club, we are also going to invite some newer titles. So you and I have already discussed a few of the newer titles that we want to get in the rotation. And there's a couple of great books coming out in the next couple of months. I happen to have an inside scoop on a few great books that are coming out. So we'll be featuring some new titles as well down the road. So I'll see you for the next Fundraisers Book Club. Thank you very much, Mark Phillips.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk is Cheap with Goals Gone Wild. We are in episode 8, Quarantine Edition. I'm Sarah.
I'm Liz.
I'm Marnie.
And I'm Lisa.
And we are so happy to have you here on Fundraising Everywhere TV. So every week we get together and we have an extended conversation of the conversation that we've already had every day in our group text, but we're bringing you into it. It's a little bit, we're a little bit more mild-mannered here than we are in our group text, to be honest. A little, a slight bit.
It's autocorrect that stops us in our... that's the only reason we're politically correct in our group text, is because it corrects to duck.
So we talk hottest topics, and I'm going to hand it on over to Liz to kick us off.
Yeah, another heavy, hot topic for us. I keep thinking at some point we're going to get some lighthearted topic to talk about, but obviously we're in Canada watching a lot of the protests coming out of Minneapolis and all across the United States last night. New York, and many other cities have had protests in regards to obviously recent activities with the police and African Americans, and again, another death. And I just think, I think it's such an important thing for us, whatever platform we have, no matter how big or how small, as white people and as people that live with privilege, that we acknowledge this is happening, and we acknowledge the systemic racism behind it, and that we acknowledge that we have a role to play in it. And if we don't acknowledge, I think if we didn't acknowledge it this week, it would be ignorant of us not to have this conversation. But just wondering, what you guys have seen and what you're thinking about what we're seeing coming out of the States. I mean, symptomatic of many, many larger issues. But the dialogue online has been fascinating. But again, Twitter is a bit of a cesspool, so I try not to take that for a valued opinion. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on what you've seen or what you're thinking about it, and here in Nova Scotia, what our responsibility is as well to acknowledge this and the problems that we have here in our region. So
First of all, I think the dialogue, you use the word dialogue loosely when it comes to the comments online.
yeah,
It's, I don't even know that there's a refreshing moment in there to be able to say, at least people are talking about this. It's ridiculous to hear these opinions and the shift in people's openness about racism. Racism isn't new. It's just in the last 4 years, it has become acceptable.
a calling card for the president of the United States.
And he didn't introduce it. He didn't change people's opinions. He opened the door for people to talk, to be that way, and to be that way openly. And it's, to me, disgusting. And to see, I don't know, I looked at this when I heard this happen. I love Minneapolis. It's one of my favorite cities. And not that that has anything to do with it, but I looked at it and I thought, what? In Minneapolis? And that is, it's everywhere. It could be, it happens in Halifax. It happens in,
it happens
in Cole Harbour.
part of the conversation that I think is what I kind of wanted to talk about today is, if you're a white person, what are you doing, or what can we be doing? And I think there's been a lot of Canadians kind of commenting that we don't have this kind of racism in Canada.
We do.
Oh, I know, but I think even here in Nova Scotia, we have a very long and very unfortunate history around Africville. For those people who are not familiar with where we are, we had an entire community that resided on one side of the harbor, and essentially the city and public officials here bulldozed their properties and moved them out. And I mean, there's more to it than that, but an entire community was destroyed because it was considered unsightly. And it was a very functional community. There was lots of people there that lived there, had a history there, but they were not provided electricity. They were not provided services. They were not provided basic sewage. They were not provided the essentials of life because of who they were. So I don't think people here in Nova Scotia really have any leg to stand on when we're talking about this kind of history of racism. And but what are we going to do? I think the question that a lot of people are asking is, what are we going to do?
So I think one of the things that you said is, there's so many different systematic issues here. Mm-hmm. And so what are we going to do? And I think when I look at it is, what are we going to do as with the white privilege that we have? That's the one pillar. What are we going to do with the privilege that we have as white women? It's a whole other pillar. What are we going to do with the privilege that we have for being in Canada and not, while there is these problems? Believe me, I went to Cole Harbour. My high school has been shut down because of issues like this. So what are we going to do with all those different privileges that we have? Can you do it as one, or can you have to pick? I was thinking of that when I was watching the Atlanta mayor, a strong Black woman who is the mayor of Atlanta, with a police chief who's a woman who was on the streets. The police chief was out there talking to people, trying to get everything calmed down. And I was thinking, like, which area do I use my privilege to speak out? Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I think that's the question that people have. And I think that's, again, a systemic issue. Something like this happens. People don't know how to react other than becoming keyboard warriors. And then in 2 weeks' time, this is something we're reading about historically and not still acting on. And I think that's one of the larger threats here, is that we let this become yesterday's news. And the reason it's today's news is because we've let things become yesterday's news for centuries.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah, and I don't want to there's never a good time to compare, but there are some eerie similarities to me, just as someone from speaking out about harassment and sexualized violence and the things that affect women. That's a very similar refrain that we say, I don't know where to start. Like, where do we start on dealing with these big issues that are affecting large groups of people? And the common thing that seems to me to come back to is that those who are not affected by it don't participate in the active solution building on how to fix these problems. And I think that's, I think there's opportunity for groundswell for us to do little things that continually force our organizations, our friends, our families to think about these bigger problems. Like I think when we think back about the Portapeak shootings, which were, you know, it wasn't that long ago, but already feels like there's so much has happened since then. Where is the public inquiry into what happened there? And, you know, we are letting so much stuff go by and not holding people accountable to it. So I think you're right. Like, these are big, meaty problems, but I think there's some amazing nonprofits and orgs out there doing some incredible work. I wonder whether or not this is the time to highlight and shine a light on the orgs that are focused on this kind of work, and whether that's something that we as a sector could be doing to lift up organizations that are dealing with systemic racism and the laws around it.
So I've taken a look at some of the work that Rachel Cargill's been doing. I think I'm pronouncing her name right, hopefully. And one of the things she provides is resources, basically for people of privilege to support the movement, to support the equalization, to support the destruction of systemic racism. And one of the things she says over and over again is, you know, don't expect me to hold my hand. Don't expect me to hold your hand. You need to figure this out, and don't come in and expect to lead.
Yeah.
This isn't your fight to lead. This is your fight to defend. This is your fight to protect. This is your fight to follow. So I started looking at some of the resources she's providing and started trying to find the equivalent resources in our community. So specifically in Nova Scotia, I did find a great listing for Canada, but I haven't found one for Nova Scotia. So at very least, I'm hoping out of this, I will have a list of nonprofits and charities that work to raise the Black community locally, fight systemic racism, put larger groups in positions of power. So things like the, you guys found for me last night, I couldn't remember his name, the Leave Out Violence.
I can't say his first name right. It's like Canada.
Quintel, yeah.
Quintrell Provo.
Yeah. And then things like, there's been a lot of good things came out of the IBM program at Dalhousie. The number of Black lawyers and Indigenous lawyers that we have in Nova Scotia is significantly different over the last 20, 25 years. So how do we make more of that happen? So those are things that are existing. So we're not stepping out and taking a leadership position or a position of power. We're following somebody else's lead and doing something that matters.
And supporting them to share I think for me, what it is that the best thing that's happened in my experience, and again, not to compare, it's just been when other people have stepped up to help out. So that
share the weight.
You can be the first one, you can be the one speaking about it, but to have lots of people behind you, supporting the heavy lifting is important. But yeah, to the point of what you were talking about with Rachel Cargill, no one can speak about lived experience except for those who have lived experience. And I think it's so important. Maybe what we can do is after this on our Twitter feed, share some of the people that we're talking about and some of the resources that we find. I think that'd be a great opportunity for us to get the word out there and encourage people to check them out. So,
and I think in the fundraising industry, we have people who are starting to speak out about it as well. And I'm sorry to say starting, because I'm sure that they've been wanting to speak out, but there's more focus on diversity and inclusion. So AFP Foundation Canada put out a series this past week, Black Fundraisers, and what it's like to work in the nonprofit industry. And it's not an easy read. It's not an easy read. Yeah. And I think that we need to read it and we need to amplify those voices. We need to have other people reading them and sharing them. I think, Liz, like you said about the harassment and sexualized violence that the industry experiences, we've also got advocates who are Indigenous talking about these the issues that they face. We have, we all know Liz Chernetsky, who just spoke at Fundraising Everywhere, who has talked extensively about ableism in fundraising. And so, are we listening? And are we amplifying instead of, what Marnie, what you said is, and I can't remember who said it, but don't put the emotional labor on somebody else to expand their time teaching us about it, right? When they need to be out there, we need to be supporting them to be out there. So those are just some resources off the top of my head that the industry has. And so I agree. I think that we should be promoting and sharing. And that's one of the ways that we can be an ally in all this, is making sure that we're using those methods that we have to get that information out there.
No, I agree.
I think the other, go ahead, Marnie.
I was going to say, I don't know, the last 24 hours feels a little bit different. I am seeing people in my social streams talking about issues of systemic racism, that have never stepped up and spoke about them before. And, sometimes maybe, and I make these mistakes too, sometimes the language isn't right, sometimes what's said isn't quite right, but there's an intent that I'm seeing that I haven't seen before.
I think too, we can help, not by attacking, but by, when somebody says something that is out of line, not just say, just calling them on it, and not being part of the problem by being aggressive about it, but helping them understand. And maybe that's not online, maybe that's talking to them one-on-one, or maybe, in a group setting, maybe it's not calling them out at a boardroom table, or maybe it is. But is it going to change their thinking without further understanding? So by attacking, I think we take away understanding. By opening conversation, I think we can increase understanding. So I guess it's getting on the soapbox and getting off when you need to be able to make things stick, make that message stick with people.
Yeah.
So going on something that Marnie just said about, seeing people start to speak out, is there a little bit of what we in fundraising, we think of as pink washing or greenwashing happening over the past at least 24 hours? And I'll use the NFL as an example. No longer going to sponsor Talk is Cheap, the NFL.
Or Diet Pepsi, or
add them to the list. So if we
this time.
But I mean, in all honesty, we've seen it. So when we saw that Target said, we will rebuild the store. When we saw, and I apologize, I don't know people's names, but we saw a local restaurant in Minneapolis said, let it burn. I will rebuild, right? This is important to talk about George Floyd, to talk about Trayvon Martin, to talk about all of those who we've lost. And then the NFL comes out with a statement because after they've seen Target, after they've seen all these brands about racism, yet we've seen the protest happening since about 2016 and what happened with Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
So is there a little bit of, and I don't know what the term is, I apologize.
Hypocrisy?
Well, yeah, hypocrisy, audacity.
Is hypocrisy the word you're looking for?
Well, I was just trying to think in terms of, what we say in the nonprofit world around pink washing and green washing. Is some of that happening? And corporate social responsibility just in general, right? Sometimes you kind of look at a sponsorship or a partnership and you're like, oh.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a possibility. I think, in some of the presentations I've done, we talk about culture eats strategy for breakfast, that saying, and the culture is everything. And I think that organizations can try and jump on board with this, but I would say when Colin Kaepernick was kicked out of the NHL and booed out of the NHL for
NFL.
Yeah,
NFL.
Sorry.
Also not sponsoring us, the NHL.
Canadian default went to hockey. But when he got kicked out, Nike picked him up as a spokesperson and created a line of shoes and they did that when it was unpopular, not when it was popular. And to me, that's going to be the defining factor with these companies. And it's interesting because this actually segues really nicely into one of our other hot topics, which is for nonprofits to be able to give some advice to for-profit or companies on how they can do business. Or as, I think there are some things that, there are certain very obvious things happening right now around this issue that I think that there are lessons. Well, I mean, there are lessons learned in both sectors, but I think, yeah, pinkwashing, I guess, I wouldn't call this, I don't know what we would call this, but it's opportunistic, I think is the right word for it.
There's no jumping on a bandwagon when your culture has shown in its actions in the recent history that you don't belong there.
Yeah.
And I think that's clearly what the NFL has done. And it's a question that nonprofits face every day, right? I don't think I've worked at a nonprofit ever that hasn't had to have some kind of policy about who they accept gifts from.
Or a mission statement declaring their mission and values.
Yep.
Yeah. Not that it makes it perfect, but I think it's, shows poor leadership.
Is that the word you're looking for? Responsibility, accountability?
Really?
Have you guys, so to that note, I shared with you guys the thread that was going around from View Lee on what they call biz-splaining, and how businesses have a propensity, in particular, people in business have a propensity sort of to biz-splain to nonprofits and say, if you did this more like how we do business, you'd be more successful, even though our sectors are completely different. I think one thing that coronavirus and COVID-19 has really showed is that we are not the same. Demand for our services have increased exponentially since the pandemic started. And we serve a very important service to society. And not that businesses don't, but I think that there's an increased demand on almost every frontline service out there. But biz planning is a real problem in our sector. We have a lot of people, we go out, we try to acquire top business leaders in our communities to join our boards. And we have a propensity to have people kind of tell us how we could be doing things more efficiently and differently. So View Lee created this kind of thing where he started the hashtag nonprofitsplaining, where nonprofit, as a joke, people in the nonprofit sector could say things that they thought businesses could learn from us. Did you guys have a chance to have a look through that post? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And Liz, I think what's interesting about that is what you just said is there is a lot. There's a lot that they can learn from us. There's a lot that we can learn from them. But you know what I think gets in the way of actually learning it and not being resentful is ego, where everyone thinks whatever they're doing is best. When I left the corporate sector and came to the charitable sector, people literally laughed in my face and said, "So you think you can be a fundraiser because you sold machines?" And I'm like, I haven't, it's that mutual respect that is completely missing. And you can't, it is completely disrespectful when someone says, you need to be more corporate. It's just so disrespectful to have that. And there is so much that the corporate sector can learn. And I'll be honest, I work in the corporate sector. It's not always, there's going to be cutthroat. There's going to be rotten people, unethical people in the corporate sector. You know what? There's going to be that in the charitable sector too. And it's just, I laughed when I read that article because I'm like, if everyone would put on their listening ears, then maybe we could get to a really productive place. But we are so far as a society from even knowing that we have ears. I think people are noticing it now because they have to plug stuff into them to have a conversation, but it aggravates me to no end.
Wouldn't we say that there is some nonprofits who basically are corporate? So, when I think about it, Charity Water, we've already had that conversation. When Scott Harrison said, I don't look at the other charities. I don't compete against the other charities. We are, this. When you work at big organizations, I would say universities, it felt very corporate working there than it does in a small charity. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. I think people do have to listen. I think I think one of the ones that got me the most, that I laughed the hardest at, was about the person retiring from nonprofit to go start their own business. Yeah. because I think that is one that we see a lot. We're supposed to be grateful.
Or that clear divide of, oh, you were in sales. Yeah, I bought things because people wanted them. You know what I do now? I help people find a way to contribute to society by investing. And it's a relationship, you know, but yeah, that I had to laugh. It's like you have to leave one to do the other, and never shall you return.
It is true, though. I did laugh about the idea of someone at the end of their nonprofit career wanting to find a more fulfilling way of living their life and starting their own like pop company or food chain restaurant. Like it is. I think these are the things that we all say to each other that we forget that it comes across as an insult to people who dedicate their careers, either side. Whether it's on the corporate side or the nonprofit side. And I do think you're right, Lisa. There's like this toxic dialogue going on that one's better than the other, but it was funny as hell. Some of the stuff that was in there was pretty on the nose.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed the one about consolidation. You know, well, there is another grocery store down the street, so you know, you guys either need to get together, or we really don't need two of you doing the same thing in the same market. And,
you know what we do? Do you know what we do? Personally, I've been told, asked, have you thought about creating a plan for that project? No. What a great idea. Do you do that in your office?
Yeah, or someone telling you that they have someone they know that has a really nice car and a big house, so they probably are a good prospect for major gifts. That's always my favorite. My number one favorite.
Yeah, the couple years in consulting, it was all about, well, you know, we've brought a professional consultant to the table, so you should be able to introduce us to those 4 people that give major gifts to every project in the community. I'm like, yeah, they don't give major gifts to every project in the community, and if you don't know them, I'm probably not going to be able to help you get to that particular person. Why don't we look at the people who already care about you?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
I don't know.
It was really, sorry, Bernie.
Oh, I was just going to say, from the grocery store equivalent, it would be kind of like, oh, I run a grocery store on Main Street, and there's 3 grocery stores between me and South Street, but I want all the customers on South Street. Like, they should be my customers. It's just silly.
Yeah, I did like how they poked. It was fun, but at the same time, it really, hopefully, if anybody who's not in the nonprofit sector reads it, like those who are finding this show, you know, where it was about the fact that, you know, something cost you such amount of money at the grocery store because we had to pay for insurance, right? Like that's overhead. We had to pay for insurance so that people who are working at the grocery store, you know, or you're safe if you fall at the grocery store. Like it's just, it brought back a lot of Dan Pilata's as well to me when I was reading it, when he says, you know, you don't ask who has the lowest overhead at the doctor's office. You want the best doctor.
My aunt does.
Save for Lisa's aunt.
I love her, but she does have those weird conversations and shares them. But it is, you don't even, if you were purchased, the difference is when you're selling a product, you're building a relationship. There is a very definitive value that other people can see. Whereas in fundraising, you're building a relationship and creating a very personal value that you're not necessarily gonna go out and say, hey, come on in and see. You know, it's a very personal thing. I think it is. The whole biz-splaining thing. I just and how do you swallow your pride for the rest of your life when you choose to go into that profession and just say, but we do every day.
We do.
I think it's, you know, just to sort of wrap this one up, that I have worked with some really high-powered CEOs, executives of companies who go out every day and raise capital for their businesses. But the minute they have to go in and talk to someone they know and ask them for a gift, it is the scariest thing they have ever had to do in their career. Because to your point, Lisa, it's personal. It's very personal, and it's very, very, it goes to a point of a personal experience that people haven't ventured into often in their lives. It's not their comfortable place.
And nor should they, because they're, well, I mean, yes, they should, but we also, coming from a female dominant perspective or profession, as fundraisers, they need to listen to and understand that the people that are supporting them as leadership volunteers have a great deal of skill that can complement what they're doing. Oh, apparently this is a hotter topic for me than I meant.
He's actually getting fired up, but yes. Yeah, anyways.
Oh.
It was an entertaining article. I enjoyed it very much. So
It made me laugh. I appreciate that group, that person. I appreciate the unicorn.
I accidentally, by the way, just as we wrap this piece up, my dog walker had written me to let me know she's finally coming for the first time in 3.5 months to start walking my dog, and I accidentally cut and paste that article into my text back to her. It's like, thanks, unicorn, and I'm like,
Is your dog walker a teenager? Because
no, she's like, oh, it's a really cute unicorn out there. I'm like, yeah, no, it has nothing to do with unicorns, but yeah. Anyways.
So we are talking about, raising money and how we do it differently and than businesses. But this weekend we're seeing a lot, and I think this month, and I think June as well. I think going into 2021, we're going to see it. And that is virtual walks. So we have these peer-to-peer, you can call them walkathons. You can call them, I don't know what else you call them actually. Does anybody still call them a walkathon?
Athons are so 1980.
Oh, I'm so old.
We had rockathons.
Retro.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea.
Retro walkathon. You can have a record player playing at it too.
You could do a rockathon where you actually rock. We went to a furniture store and rocked in a rocking chair. That'd be a cool event.
You meant actual rocks.
No, some people took their own from home because they were more comfortable. We had to rock for a period of time, and they brought us milkshakes.
Yep.
Wow.
But on to your point, Sarah.
So we're seeing a lot of virtual walks. Lisa, you were talking about, thinking about your past places of employment where this would have been a big walk weekend. Yep. It is a walk weekend for my place of employment. I think all of us in some way, shape, or form what fundraiser hasn't had to do a walk? Let's start there. Does anybody know one who has never had to do a walk?
I know them.
Do you?
Never worked.
They're the unicorns.
Yeah, they're the unicorns.
So what do we think of virtual walks?
I've participated in them, but I have not organized one.
Really?
You've never organized a walk? Ooh, Liz, no. You are a unicorn.
Yeah, what about a golf tournament?
Golf tournaments?
I've organized those.
Yeah, I've organized those too, but
gala dinners, lots of other things. I've actually I worked with an organization in Victoria, BC that did like the Amazing Race, kind of like those competitions, but I've never done a walk. So
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of heavy reliance on your grassroots volunteer. Sometimes, it's a lot of work.
What do you guys think is going to happen, or do you think COVID's going to change the way that we do these things permanently, or is this just a blip in the radar?
It depends. There's so many factors that come into it. In some cases, the organization I worked for had virtual walks all along for communities that weren't near a big walk. And every organization where I've done a walk, they had those for small communities. I have really enjoyed this last few weeks watching these virtual walks unfold and people telling their stories, and everybody, not the biggest fundraisers, but everybody telling their story in a very different way. Quite often you pick the people who raise the most are often the most engaged. So they're the stories you hear. But now we're hearing the story of every single walker. They're sharing it. People that are not directly connected to a cause. So people are, I'm going to punt this back to you, Sarah, but people are getting really creative in how they're actually, somebody did a bike ride. Somebody did they did a bake-a-thon instead of a a marathon baking session instead of a walk. They're doing whatever the heck they want to raise money and appealing to people in their own interests. But you had probably one of the most epic.
I don't understand why you weren't on the cover of the news. Like, seriously, you
Yes,
just didn't do
you
enough
need to-
PR for that.
It was
You know
your
what?
timing. It was a Friday night.
Well, and
Busy news week.
I did a 5K in a T-Rex costume that had no, it's inflatable, so it doesn't have any holes for air, right? Because then all of the air would go out. So I did that, and I was watching the weather, and it was supposed to rain all weekend, and I didn't take into consideration where we live and that changes. 12 years of an event planner for outside events, and you think I would just clue in. So I did it Friday night because I looked out and I was like, oh, there's a cool breeze, there's dark clouds, like go and get this done. And my neighbors, so I live on a very small street, my neighbors were at the end of their driveway, like, and it didn't start at first. Here's the funny thing. They didn't come out at first because it was like, there's Sarah in her dinosaur costume again. Right? Like they weren't like anything special's happening. And then like when I was 2K in of walking up and down our street, they were like, no, this is different. What's going on here? And, I was telling them, I couldn't see them. That's the other thing, because there is one little plastic piece, but it fogged up right away. And my glasses were fogged up, so I couldn't see. And all I heard them, they were talking and they're like, why isn't the news here? Why is the news not here showing you doing this? So, which was super nice. I think that you're right. I think a lot of people are doing something different because they don't feel attached to having to be at a certain place at a certain time with all their family, and like, oh, I got to stand in a registration line, then I got to go pick up t-shirts, and I got to go change into those t-shirts. So I think that that's going to change a little bit. And we heard that on the Fundraising Everywhere. There was a couple of people in the conference who talked about events moving forward and how they're going to look. I think so far from my experience of a first virtual walk, the community, the sense of community is not there.
Yeah.
So, that's really important when you're working in any organization, if it's whatever it's for. People want to galvanize together and they want to be part of something that looks successful and feels successful, and they can come and they can say, what a great day. And we all know the actual walk is a celebration of that success that you have spent the last month telling your story and fundraising. It's not, you don't raise money technically that day.
No,
right?
The money's done by, the money, it's all in and counted the night before. The one thing, and the online fundraising is critical. It's more economical, it's easier for most people. We have the challenge in Atlantic Canada where we don't have reliable internet in a lot of places, and it's not, so we're behind that curve. Interestingly, and I have no idea, but some of the traditional community fundraisers that have happened, that's a piece that, will they ever bounce back? And they raised a lot of money, like they raised significant amounts of money. So will they bounce back? Will the passion return? People age out of walks, and in a lot of cases, they're impacted by cause very heavily, perhaps for a period of time. When that problem goes away, or they're cured, it's a cycle. So will those offline community fundraisers come back? Will the passion continue? And will the online piece catch up to that in a region like ours?
Yeah, so we definitely, I think that's a huge factor for a lot of our charities, is the regional issues. I think as well, there's only going to be so many people who want to do something like a 5K in a T-Rex costume, right? And so for this year, that was the choice. But if this was a regular walk year, no. Like I would be running the route the day before to make sure it's fine. I'd be walking the route that morning to make sure it's fine. I'd be doing my 5K actually into like a 20K over the course of a weekend. But nobody, the thing is that you hear this a lot. I think, I hate to say millennials, but with the younger generation, they don't want to go do a 5K, right? Like, right now that if every,
well, they're just not putting enough Instagram spots on it.
But you've heard this, there's a very famous, I don't want to say it out loud. There's a very famous walk that happens in schools. And if every kid gave $1, they would raise more money. than they do through this fundraising of pledge sheets, right? So we think that the kids are learning about philanthropy and fundraising with these 5Ks, but what we hear is that when they get older, they don't want to do the 5K. They want to, how long can they jump on a pogo stick? Pogo stick. I don't know if they have pogo sticks.
I think they went away with lawn darts.
Right? Like,
We had a bunch of kids raise money for us through a 8-hour trampoline-a-thon.
Yeah.
And don't ask me how that worked, because I figured at some point they had to pee, but whatever.
if it's the same group, I've done it.
Oh,
And they
okay.
take turns.
Yeah,
So
it's a
there's
shift
always
thing.
somebody on the trampoline.
We
Got it.
used to have a bounce-a-thon and an inflatable, I don't even
Apple?
remember what the mascot was, but it was very, very public. The value was they raised some money, but as in that case, equally importantly, it was very visible. And alumni from that school would stop by and say, hey, I remember doing this when I was in my first year of university. And the stories that came out, I mean, I was clearly not of the demographic that was bouncing inside the castle, but the stories that came out of it. And that's the piece where the bringing together of people, you get your next story for the next year and you give people that opportunity to connect.
But then you're relying on volunteers to go and make this public, like get the permits to do the trampolining. You know, you're relying on the person in the dinosaur costume to go to the media and say, hey, I'm doing this, versus when here's the conference center we're going to be in, here's the time that we're walking, it's all organized by the organization. I just wonder as we move into it if you can keep a virtual walk but also have the traditional walk.
I think the answer to that is there's somewhere inside of all of this all virtual, do whatever you want, or let's have a really super serious organized thing. There's a magic formula that could really just really, but it all comes back to connecting with those people with the cool stories. I do have to say, somebody said, we didn't even have to fill out a risk management form for this. And I'm like, there was a little part of my soul that died. And I'm like, that's an important form.
Well, I don't think we're going to find the magic formula, so that might be the moment we take to wrap this up. So this is Goals Gone Wild. You've been listening to Talk is Cheap on Fundraising Everywhere. We're so glad you were with us this week, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
Bye.
Hi. What we're looking at here is a mandala of sorts from our friend Cece. She sent this to me almost 1.5 years ago when we first got started. Cece considers herself a PWP. That's a painter with Parkinson's. I love that. So I just wanted to point this out. I am Mo Onstead with the Unsteady Hand. We'll be spending the next 15-20 minutes together talking about mandalas, doing a little deeper dive than we did the first 5-minute video we talked about. I also want to point out that what I'm going to do today is just how I make mandalas and kind of what they mean to me is different for everybody. That's the cool thing about art. We've talked about this a lot, or creativity or imagination or playfulness. I use the word art, sorry. Anyway, I'll be sharing a lot of links on the website to other people making mandalas on YouTube because there are some amazing videos. To me, a mandala is a journey or a map of sorts of a journey. And in that map, typically in a mandala, this would represent the center of the universe, so to speak, at least the way I think about it. And this would represent the edge of the universe or a destination in our life or in a journey. And that journey can be a straight line here. It could be a couple of lines to that point. It could be a curved line to this point. It could be a spiral. It could be a wavy line. There's no rules to how we get to these points, right? So this mandala is somehow, when you're thinking about it, you can think about a journey getting from one point to another point, and how do you represent that symbolically? So we're just going to start with a mandala, and we'll kind of talk about the pieces and the parts as we go. So this is somewhat intimidating, I think, as a blank white sheet of paper or a blank white circle. So what I do to get started for a couple reasons is, one, I just put a dot in the center. And that one gives me a place to start, a circular pattern around. It also, when we talk kind of metaphorically about what is a mandala, it's the beginning of my journey to the outside, to the end point, which could be out here somewhere. And so we're going to fill up this thing with symbolism, like things that we think of as symbols in this world. You know, some of them are religious symbols. There's different religious symbols. There's that yin yang. There's the Christian, Catholic. There's all kinds of symbolism that we can use. We also will fill this up with patterns. So patterns could be dashes of arrows. Patterns could be just dashes. Patterns could be a row of circles. So those are the patterns. And then also we're going to talk about layers of meaning. And that's kind of getting a little metaphorical, but we'll have layers in this mandala like that. So start with that mark. You can also, you know, if it's easier for you, start with a mark like this. Forget the dot. Start with 4 marks. Just make a mark on the page and don't worry about it. Once I have a mark on the page, this is where mandalas can be kind of meditative, kind of mindful. I just start to repeat patterns over and over and over in a circular manner. I don't know if that makes sense, but we'll start doing it, and it probably will. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a square in every one of these blanks. And what I found is easier than trying to draw a square in 4 different directions. And you see my squares aren't that great, and that's okay. I like to spin the paper because then I'm drawing the same square with the same motor movements every time. And for somebody with Parkinson's like us, that might be helpful. And then to do that thing, I'll just do the same thing. I'll repeat a pattern. And this one I'm going to do on the tip and over the square with a circle, right? And so these are just some symbols that we can use that are real basic, that really have no particular meaning per se, but they're just kind of look cool. And then I might finish up and I'll put some arrows in here. And right now I'm using the O3, which some of you will have. And now I kind of lost my spot here, and now I'm going to go here. So you see I'm just repeating this pattern until I get back to where I started. And you can see it's starting to build a mandala. And that's kind of cool, and that's what we're doing. We're just building a circular design to start with. It doesn't have to have a deep meaning. It can just look cool, or it can have a really deep meaning. It doesn't matter. So back to my one that doesn't really have a deep meaning, and it may or may not look cool. I'll switch pens so you can kind of see the difference. This is an 08. It's much fatter. So if I draw that same arrow, you'll see it's a much fatter line. And I like arrows a lot, especially when we're talking about journeys and destinations. And you can see how these arrows are getting harder for me to draw if I don't spin the paper. And if I just spin the paper, it's much easier. And I've lost some of my symmetry here now, and I'm okay with that. Mandalas don't have to be symmetrical, and they don't have to be geometric. They can be loose. I've got one here that's kind of cool. This is actually a mandala that somebody did by tapping, which for somebody with Parkinson's might work really, really well. So anyway, we got that. So now talking about some of the, you all got 3 Sharpies in your kit of random colors. I got 3 Sharpies of random colors picked up by Michael over here. And I got the Preppy colors. I don't know if you guys remember the Preppy handbook. I do, but I grew up in the 80s. All right, so I'm going to start with this blue Sharpie. It's one of my skinny Sharpies. I want to show you a few little tricks that I figured out with Sharpies and these pieces of paper. I'm going to fill you in on a little secret. These are coffee filters. They work for an AeroPress. Anyway, so what I found is if I push and hold the pen down, you'll see it's going to bloom in there. And you can fill spaces with round dots by pressing and holding. Now you'll see I'll do that with this. It takes a long time. And then I'll do the same thing with a fatter pen. We're going to use the pink, I guess, since we're doing Preppy. And the fat one you'll see goes really fast. And I'm going to just make a couple of marks. I'm doing the tips of the arrows and the arrow and the triangles. And you can see by holding it down, I get kind of a round dot. Now if I just tap, I get these small dots. And if I hold the pen down longer, you'll see I'll get bigger dots. And I'm going to speed this up right now because you don't need to watch me make bigger dots for the next minute. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this pink pen. I'm going to pick up this skinny pen again. I'm going to show you some of the symbols that I use a lot in my mandalas. I use these arrows. I use the circles. You can use closed circles and open circles. And you see I'm just going around and I'm moving the paper as I do this. We can put some hearts in there. I like hearts. Kind of a hopeless romantic, probably. These make for nice love notes on an anniversary, or just a random note. You could do something as simple as a plus, I just put 3 between those hearts. I'll put 3 between these hearts. You see, if I don't spin the paper, my pluses get all wanky. So if I spin the paper, they stay kind of uniform. They don't have to be uniform. I kind of like the uniformity in my mandalas, but they don't need to be uniform. Like if I show you this one, I made this one as an example for our first video. There's not a lot of uniformity to that, but there's a little bit. It's kind of a happy medium, controlled chaos maybe. So we've got those ideas. Now a couple of things we can do with the pen. I'm going to go back to the skinny blue pen. If you draw a fast line, the line will be skinny. So if I draw these lines fast out from the center, you'll see they're super, super skinny. And I'm going really fast. I'm not speeding this up. I do speed up the camera from time to time. I'm not speeding up there now. Now if I go slow, I'm going to draw a line on either side of that, or just on the right side of that, I guess. You'll see it makes a nice fat line. And that's by going slow. And you see I'm kind of getting out of my symmetry a little bit here, and I'm okay with that. You know, that's okay. Now I'm doing kind of a fast line there. That's okay. I'm going to slow it down again. I have a hard time slowing it down, as we all know. So that's the fat line, skinny line. The other thing we can do, I'll pick up the green pen or whatever color this is, turquoise. We'll start with a dot and pull it away fast. And we kind of get this dot with a line. So we dot and then pull it away fast. And of course I pick up the pen that doesn't have any ink in it. Okay, I'm not going to lie. I pulled a fast one in. I picked up that green pen and I didn't check it. It was dead. So what I was showing you is if you press up in the middle of this dot and hold and then zip out, you get kind of a dot with a streak in it. And these are going off the page. You're not going to see. I'll do them kind of going around. So I'm kind of flicking it, and I'm getting that pointed line, right? And sometimes I'll make that center really dense. So in theory, this could be done. To me, it kind of looks like kind of a sappy Hallmark Valentine's card, but it's also hand-drawn, and I guarantee you, if you gave this to your significant other, they will melt. But I'm going to throw one more color on here, just for giggles, to fill it up. I'm not a big fan of white space. This is one that I made a couple weeks ago. I filled up almost all the white space. This is one that I made, and it's a little sappy, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. This is one I made a couple weeks ago as well. I filled up almost all the white space, and I only used dots by holding the pen down and letting it bleed. And that's all I did on that one. I didn't use any black. I didn't use any lines. So I just want to say it's done. So I was going to use this blue pen on here. I'm going to call this done. There's no reason it's done other than I'm just done with it. I'm going to start with a new piece of paper here in just a second. I'll slide that in there. All right, so before we move on to our next mandala, I'm going to throw a few more words out here. These are some things we can think about when we are making our mandalas. What direction are we headed towards from the center or whatever point we pick? You know, where is that point that we pick? Which direction are we going? Are we going up, down, to the left, to the right? Are we going in circles? Where are we moving? Another thing we can think about is, are there connections to be made? Are we connecting the dots? Rather than moving in a direction, are we making connections between things? You can think about that. Another thing we can think about maybe is that mandala representing some sort of passage rather than necessarily, and it's more of a unilateral one direction mandala that moves from one edge of the universe to the other rather than from the center. Right, so there's all kinds of options. I want you guys to be really free and fluid with this. I find these like meditative, practicing mindfulness. So take a moment to like really think about what you're doing and slow down. I mean, we're good at that. We have Parkinson's. It's slowing down. This is an opportunity to do it on purpose, right? So we can be purposefully slow and mindful. This builds a thing that we always talk about, neuroplasticity. We'll do a whole lab where we talk about neuroplasticity, I think. So we talk about mandalas being round. And they are round by definition, but I have this one here. We'll put that down here. This isn't a mandala, but maybe it is. We've got a circle here that starts it all, a point in the middle of the universe. This is square. It's got patterns. It's got some symbolism. To me, it's symbolic. So I just wanted to throw this out that, you know, don't get locked into the idea that this drawing has to be circular. Mandalas typically are, but if you find yourself wanting to lean towards more angular things, go for it. Have fun with it. So I also want to tell a little quick story about this drawing. I drew this about 6 months ago, I believe, and I showed it to my mom, and I was mentioning that I probably didn't have Parkinson's, because when you look at these lines, you wouldn't think that somebody who had Parkinson's made this. And she kind of mentioned that it was kind of almost like I was redefining what it means to draw with Parkinson's. And I thought that was really kind of a neat idea. And then something popped into my mind or her mind. One of us came up with a mind reimagining what it is to draw with Parkinson's, and I thought, what about reimagining Parkinson's as our mission statement? It's kind of short, kind of sweet, but it's pretty cool. So that's how we came up with the mission statement. Reimagining Parkinson's was this exact drawing when my mom was commenting on redefining what it means to draw with Parkinson's. If you look closely in here, you'll see there's some squiggly lines. Most of my lines are pretty squiggly, but in the big picture, it looks pretty much like I don't have Parkinson's, right? Who knows what that's all about? We do know that it is a resting tremor, and I was doing an action at this point. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. That's the story. I'm going to talk a little bit about ghosts and a little bit about watercolor backgrounds, and then we're going to wrap it up, I think. I will put lots of examples on the website. That's theunsteadyhand.org. My email, I'll say it now and I'll say it again, is mo, at theunsteadyhand.org. And I'm going to show you real quick about what ghosts are and what that means. I'll pick a couple of bright colors so you kind of get the idea. Blue and orange are complementary colors. Some of you know what that is, some of you don't. We'll talk about that at another lab. The reason we're going to use these watercolors now to do this is in your next kit, next month, we're going to do abstract watercolors with these pens and the new watercolors you'll be getting next month. How exciting is that? Anyway, so a ghost, if you take two of these and put them one on top of the other, and I'm going to tap them together so they're kind of together, and then you do your dots. This works the best for a ghost. I'm just going to do a very small ghost and then show you two examples of ghosts, or maybe three. So if I do those 5 dots with the orange, and then I do these 5 dots, and I'm pressing and holding for a while, and you'll see why in a second. And then I'll do a slow line with the blue and a slow line with the blue. There's that passage we were talking about. And then when I open this up, you'll see there's actually 2 that match. One is the ghost, one is the real one. Sometimes the ghost ends up super, super cool. So I've got a couple examples of that right here. We saw the heart before. This is the ghost of the heart. So this was on top of this. This is kind of a lighter, more abstract version of this more succinct, kind of distinct colors. That's kind of cool. And then this is the other one I showed you that has a ghost with it. This was drawn on top of this one. I love the ghost of the, they're both super cool. But this one is the original. This was the ghost that was underneath it. Okay, so one last thing as we wrap up, I want to show you ways to use this watercolors that you'll be getting next month with these coffee filters. I put these 2 down. These are 2 that are finished. This one has some black dots on it. There was actually the ghost under something else. That's fine. I'm going to show you how to do this real quick. You might have noticed these paints appear through the magic of video. They are now right there, as along with this magic water and a magic brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack. Remember, we just talked about ghosts. I can make a lot of these all at one time. I'm going to stack about 5 or 6. I guess I've got about 6. I'm going to get rid of these. I've got 6. I'm going to put them in a nice little pan here. And there's 2 ways to do this. I'm going to grab another couple for fun, and I'll show you another little trick we can do. So I'm going to pick up a color. Michael, what color am I going to pick? Red.
Red. Red. So I'm going to pick up a nice big dollop of really, really wet red. And I'm just going to put this together. And I'm going to hold these down. I'm just going to push that brush down there, and I'm going to hold it. And you'll see it'll bleed. And then I'll get some more water, and I can make that bleed even more with lots of water. And then I'll pick another color. For me, I'll just pick blue because I like blue. And I'll make a line with blue. And I'll get a lot more water. Right? They're called watercolors for a reason. And you'll see these will start to bow and buckle, which is kind of a drag at first. And then I can actually blend these. We've talked about this in labs before, but for those of you who are new, you'll kind of figure this out. We'll do this next time with watercolors. And then I'll grab a little green. And just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to leave a little white space on here. Lots of water again. Remember, we're getting a lot of water to soak through to the ghost. I'm going to overlap these a little bit. Right, so that's, I'm leaving the white space. Normally I cover the whole thing like these 2 were covered. And then you'll see as I peel these off one at a time, each one is a reduction from the one above it. You'll see the white space gets more dramatic and the color gets a little more faded and a little more, but those are cool. Those all could be used for mandala. You could put a dot here on that one to start your mandala. You can put a dot here on this one to start your mandala. You can put a dot here and go in a circular around that. So there's really no rules. So we're going to leave it at that. Once again, my name is Mo. I'm with the Unsteady Hand. We are at the unsteadyhand.org if you want to come to our webpage, which you should because you're already here because you're watching this video. But search around, look around. There's a lot more to be seen, a lot more to be had. You can email me at mo, M-O, at the Unsteady Hand.
And until next time, which will be abstract watercolors using these pens and your new watercolors in your bag next month. All right, so thanks for joining us. Tune in next month. I'll be delivering packets again like I did this month. They will contain a different project. They will incorporate these pens, I will tell you that, so don't lose these pens. And I will see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Michael. He does all the work behind the scenes. I want to give him a big shout out, and we wouldn't happen without him. So that's about all we got. Have a great month. I hope I see you soon. Bye-bye.